Callie wiped the back of her hand across her brow, squinting as the bright afternoon sun glared off the expanse of the slow-moving river. The air in Riverton had grown still and heavy, so stifling that the only relief anyone could hope for was a half-hearted breeze that rustled the leaves. Callie inhaled deeply, tasting the faint tang of river water, mixing with the dusty dryness of the nearby dirt road. She had never liked the scorching heat, but she had promised Lydia, her best friend since middle school, that they would do something fun to close out the summer. And so the plan was set, a group of 6 friends, all perched on the brink of adulthood, deciding to spend one more steamy day at the old Riverside Bend. They were finishing their last free summer before college or full-time work. "Where's Jonah?" Callie asked, twisting around to see if Lydia had noticed Jonah's absence. Lydia glanced behind her, flipping her dark hair off her shoulder. She shrugged. "He's gathering the rest of them near the trucks, I think. Something about coolers or drinks. You know Jonah." She gave a playful roll of her eyes. Callie nodded. The tight group was known around town as the River Rovers, a nickname they'd earned simply by being the most consistent crowd to use the Riverside Bend every hot weekend. Jonah was usually the first one in the water, fearless, a strong swimmer, curly-haired, always sporting that confident half-smirk. Typically, he'd be the one pushing others into floaties or poking fun at their hesitation. Lydia had teased him for years. Callie scanned the horizon. Her heart thrummed with a bright sense of possibility. Soon, the rest of the friends would appear. The plan, as they discussed, was pretty straightforward. Find a shady spot, break out the portable grill, lounge around near the bank, possibly wade or swim. The big difference this year was that 2 new people had joined the group, Milo and Corinne, the couple who had just started dating in late spring. They were brimming with that newly discovered love. Half turning to Lydia again, Callie said, "Any sign of Milo and Corinne yet?" Lydia gestured across the dusty parking area. "I think they're at the store, grabbing ice. They told me they'd catch up soon." Right on cue, Jonah's voice rang out from behind. "We're loaded up. You 2 ready or what?" He sidled over, arms bristling with muscle, and tossed 2 bright orange life vests near Callie's feet. "This place might be calmer than usual, but you never know. The water's deeper than last summer." Callie nodded, stepping aside. "Thanks. I'll keep that in mind." She felt an odd flutter in her chest but dismissed it. It wasn't fear exactly, just a subtle sense that the day might be carrying a hush of foreboding. But she shook it off. Summer was almost over, and nothing was going to ruin her last big outing with these friends. By the time Milo and Corinne finally arrived, the sun was dipping lower, bathing the slow-flowing water in gold. They had indeed grabbed a huge bag of ice, as well as some last-minute beverages. Corinne's cheeks glowed pink from the humidity, and Milo's lively grin testified to how excited he was to introduce Corinne to the Riverside Bend tradition. Corinne gave a slightly nervous laugh, looking at Lydia and Callie with wide eyes. "So, you guys come out here all the time, right? I grew up in the city, so I've never really done a big Riverside day like this." Lydia patted her shoulder. "Don't worry, it's basically a chill hangout. The water's gentle near the bank. If you're not a strong swimmer, you can just wade." Corinne nodded gratefully, though she glanced uncertainly at Milo, who was rummaging in the truck bed. Meanwhile, Jonah tossed out an enthusiastic, "No better place to end the summer than here." They set up a base camp about 30 yards from the water's edge. The slope down to the bend was mild, dotted with small pebbles and patches of reeds. The afternoon rays were mellowing but still warm enough to make them appreciate the eventual dip in the river. Callie took the lead in distributing tasks. She asked Lydia to help unpack the portable grill, Milo and Jonah to handle the ice chest and drinks, and Corinne to set the towels near the best shady patch. As for Callie herself, she started rummaging through a bag for the light meal they'd all share later: hot dogs, chips, fresh fruit. In the background, the hum of cicadas rose and fell, a natural summer soundtrack. Occasionally, the wind swayed the tall grasses. The entire scene looked picture-perfect, the kind of day they'd all remember fondly. No one could guess that a creeping undercurrent of fate was about to unravel. Within minutes, Jonah was shirtless, bounding toward the water. "Anyone want a quick swim with me? Let's see if the water's as nice as I remember." Milo, grinning wide, quickly followed. "Corinne, want to come too?" Corinne made a face, half laughing. "I might wade in a bit. I don't want to go too deep. Not sure about the current." Jonah reassured her. "Don't worry, it's calm near the bend. And Milo's right here if you need a hand. Lydia stretched lazily on a towel, adjusting the cap on her bottled water. I'll join you later. Let me just get a bit more sunshine first. Callie hovered near the bank, feeling that little flutter again in her stomach. Something about the water was mesmerizing. She told herself it was just a swirl of emotional nostalgia, memories of countless carefree afternoons. But was there something else? She could almost sense the hush of the current, like the river was quietly waiting. Before she could dwell on it, Jonah splashed rowdily, hollering at them to hurry up, Milo and Corinne giggling behind. The sun danced on the ripples as the small group advanced. At first, everything was comedic and sweet. Milo teased Corinne by gently flicking water droplets at her. Jonah jokingly threatened to dunk them both. The water was surprisingly refreshing. Corinne, though hesitant, managed to follow them a few steps away from the shallows, her expression turning from fear to a kind of uncertain delight. Callie waded in knee-deep, but no further. She sighed, letting the water swirl around her legs. I'll watch from here, she announced, waving them off. Don't go too far, okay? Jonah saluted sarcastically. Yes, ma'am. He turned to Corinne. You see? This is easy. Just keep your knees loose and let your body float. Corinne's laughter rang out, bright and pure, as Milo circled around her, showing how to tread water. The mild current tugged gently, but nothing seemed dangerous. Not yet. It was, ironically, a day without storms or strong winds. The river was unremarkable. Usually, trouble started if there had been heavy rainfall upstream, but that day had been clear, the preceding week too. So no one could have predicted the subtle undertow that ran a few yards from their position. Callie watched as Jonah dived in a graceful arc, popping up a short distance away. He laughed, beckoning Milo. Come on, let's swim a bit deeper. Milo rubbed the water from his eyes, turning to Corinne. You want to head back, or are you okay? Corinne bit her lip. I'm fine, but I might stay near the shallows. I'm not that confident yet. He nodded. Sure, I'll just be a minute with Jonah. A playful wink. Stay in that spot, all right? She nodded, floating just enough to keep her head above the surface. She could stand with her toes scraping the riverbed below. The rest of the group, Callie, Lydia, others, had parted ways for a moment. Lydia was near the towels, rummaging for sunscreen, and Callie was half in, half out, flipping water with her toes. Jonah and Milo, two decent swimmers, cut across the surface, enjoying the deeper stretch. They never realized the undercurrent that had recently formed. Often, small changes in the river's depth or upstream water flow create pockets of unexpected pull. A moment later, Jonah exclaimed, "Whoa, the water's pulling more than usual." He tried to angle back, but a swirl of faster current at mid-river caught him. He shouted to Milo, "Swim sideways, out of the current." Milo, alarmed, kicked hard, pushing diagonally. The swirl was modest, but enough to unnerve them. Then, abruptly, Jonah was able to break free of the suction zone. He yelped in triumph, but as he did, an odd wave slapped him in the face. He coughed and lost his momentum. On the bank, Callie glimpsed their sudden alarm. She felt a spike of fear. Jonah? Milo? You guys okay? No immediate answer, just frantic splashing. Realizing something was off, she called out to Lydia, "They're in trouble." Lydia sprang to her feet, shading her eyes to see better. She spotted Jonah's head dipping, then reappearing as he sputtered water. Meanwhile, Corinne was about 15 feet closer to the deeper zone than she intended. Perhaps she had drifted unwittingly, focusing on Milo's distant figure. She felt a gentle tug at her feet. Alarm rose as she realized she might be crossing into that same undercurrent. Jonah coughed violently, trying to keep afloat. Milo reached him and tried to help, hooking an arm around Jonah's torso as taught in basic rescue. But the swirl was strong enough that Milo, not a trained lifeguard, struggled to maintain both of them at the surface. Milo! Jonah! Callie cried. She shot a wild glance around, noticing the bright orange life vests they'd hardly used. Without pausing to think, she seized one vest and sprinted into the water. Lydia, though uncertain, also grabbed a second vest, but paused near the edge, trembling. She could see the confusion unfolding. Corinne now looking frightened, dog paddling in place, and further out, Milo clinging to Jonah. Callie, forging ahead, realized the water was deeper than she expected. She forced herself to keep moving, gripping the life vest. She felt an undertow swirl around her calves, threatening her balance. She nearly lost the vest to a wave that slapped her chest. A strangled cry broke the hush. Corinne's voice echoed, laced with panic. "Help me. I can't." She coughed, swallowed water, arms flailing. In that instant, Jonah submerged fully, out of Milo's arms. Milo let out a terrified expletive, inhaling water. He too started sinking. Callie's heart hammered. "No, no, no," she launched the vest in their direction. "Milo, grab it." But her throw fell short by a yard. Corinne, feeling the swirl intensify, gasped as her legs gave out. She sank to her chin. She tried a final frantic wave to Callie, but then her face disappeared under the ripples. Time seemed to slow. The sun glinted off the water's surface, painting an eerily beautiful shimmer, belying the horror beneath. Moments later, it was over. Jonah, Milo, and Corinne had vanished. Stunned, Callie tread water in the approximate area, scanning left and right. Jonah. Milo. Corinne. Her voice cracked, echoing upstream. No sign. Lydia shrieked from the bank. "Callie, come back. I'll call the authorities." Shaking, Callie forced herself to attempt a shallow dive. She came up empty. Another dive. Nothing but murky depths. She panicked as her lungs burned. She knew she couldn't keep diving alone. Staggering onto the bank, Callie coughed, eyes wild. Lydia was already on the phone with emergency services, voice trembling. The rest of the group, some had run for help, others stood in shock. A short while later, local rescue volunteers arrived, accompanied by paramedics. They launched a small boat and began systematic search patterns along the bend. The hush was replaced by the frenzied calls of rescue workers. Soon, the midday turned to dusk, and still no trace was found. That night was a blur of horror and heartbreak for the entire friend group. Some stood vigil by the bank, holding onto a shred of hope. Others paced about in tearful desperation. By the next dawn, all illusions of a miraculous survival had faded. The local elder, known simply as Mr. Brown or Uncle Brown, suggested they do what tradition demanded, attempt a calling near the water. People in Riverton believed that sometimes a body wouldn't surface if the lost soul was stuck beneath logs, or entangled, or if the spirit hadn't properly parted from the mortal realm. Uncle Brown's method was straightforward. Use a branch, tie on a small cloth the color of the missing person's favorite, chant an old invocation, and ask the spirit to guide them to the remains. At sunrise, with the hush of the river, Callie stood next to Uncle Brown while he tossed the branch into the water. He murmured incantations under his breath, asking the souls to come forward. The rest of the friends stood behind, subdued. In a strange hush, Callie felt a breeze ripple across the surface, though the morning had seemed windless. She sensed a presence behind her, like a soft whisper. In that moment, the slender branch spun slowly, drifting about 20 yards downstream. One of the rescue volunteers called out, "There, look." Floating near the surface, a pale shape appeared. The volunteer waded swiftly, and with the help of two others, managed to guide the body to shore. It was Corinne. Corinne's body was heartbreakingly still, cold to the touch. The medics confirmed no sign of life. A hush fell over the group, overshadowed by grief. Where were Milo and Jonah, though? The search continued, the volunteer boat crisscrossing the bend. 2 hours later, a shout, "Found them!" The entire group rushed to the bank. This time, the retrieval was more complicated. Jonah and Milo, locked together by a final desperate embrace, were caught in a tangle near some submerged debris. The water had stilled them in a horrific tableau of arms entwined, as if in a final attempt at rescue. The triple tragedy sent shockwaves. The families arrived, heartbreak on full display. Over the next day, preparations for funerals commenced in a daze of sorrow. Lydia and Callie, once so sure of an innocent summer, were now drawn into an endless tide of guilt and confusion. Yet, that wasn't the end. The night before the planned funeral services, Callie had a dream. She found herself on the riverbank at sunset. In the dream, the water shimmered unnaturally, and emerging from the reflection, she saw Jonah's face, pale yet peaceful. He mouthed silent words, "I'm sorry." She jolted awake, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. Looking at her phone, it was 2:43 a.m. The sense of presence lingered. She realized her window was open, a faint breeze blowing the curtains. For a fleeting moment, she thought she heard Corinne's gentle laugh. Or perhaps it was just the night wind. On the day of the funeral, the entire community gathered. 3 separate caskets lined up in the old Riverton church. Flowers, photos, tears. A local choir sang softly. None could recall a triple funeral of friends in living memory. After the formal rites, folks followed the procession to the town cemetery. During the final eulogies, Lydia read a letter she had scrawled, trembling. Jonah, Milo, Corinne, words fail me. None of us can grasp why this happened. We can't bring you back, but I promise we'll honor your memory every day. Somewhere behind the crowd, Callie stood, tears slipping down her cheeks. She gazed at the caskets, speechless. She felt that sense again, the hush of the river. A silent echo of what might have been if they'd said no to that final dip. The caskets were lowered. People drifted away, murmuring condolences. A hush descended over the burial site, only broken by a single mockingbird perched on the fence. As the sun sank low on that day of heartbreak, a certain finality weighed on the survivors. Yet, the events afterward showed that something intangible lingered. Over the subsequent nights, each friend had some measure of dream or sign, a voice calling their name, a fleeting shape in a mirror. Nothing harmful, but enough to confirm that the bond among them, and with the lost souls, transcended the boundary of life and death. Weeks turned into months. The riverside bend, once so lively with their laughter, became deserted. People said the water's mood had changed. Strange lights glowed at dusk. Anglers occasionally claimed they heard faint calls over the ripples. One evening, about a month after the funeral, a fisherman named Old Pete anchored near the bend. He was tying his lines when a soft voice behind him whispered, "It's calmer where you cast." Startled, Pete whirled around. No one was in his boat. He looked across the water. Nothing. He reeled in quickly, deciding the fish could wait. Stories multiplied, subtle apparitions at the water's edge. Some saw a fleeting silhouette of Corinne, hair dripping, gazing as though searching. Others felt a brush of cold air. Meanwhile, the friend group disintegrated under the strain. Lydia sank into depression, rarely leaving her house. Callie tried to move on, returning to daily routines, but the memory weighed heavily. Despite it all, rumor had it that certain nights, if one stood by the old path leading to the bend, they'd hear distant splashing or the faint echo of a girl's laughter. Half a year later, in early spring, Callie resolved to confront her memories. The nightmares persisted occasionally. She'd see Jonah's face, or glimpses of Milo locked in that final struggle. She thought she heard Corinne's voice, as if calling from across a barrier. So she decided to visit the riverside bend at twilight, alone, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. The gloom of the path overshadowed her as she walked the slope. She arrived at the spot they once used as a base camp. The river quietly lapped at the shore. Callie placed the bouquet on a flat rock. She had no illusions of being answered, but she parted her lips to speak. "I'm sorry. If only we'd realized the hidden current. If only we'd been more careful. I hope you found peace." The breeze stirred, ruffling the petals. For a brief instant, she thought she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder, impossible, intangible. Her eyes brimmed with tears, yet she smiled faintly. In that moment, she felt relief, as though acknowledging her sorrow, her regrets. She took a step back, seeing the river in a new perspective, not malevolent, not safe, simply indifferent. She whispered a final goodbye and turned to leave. Time moved forward. The heartbreak gradually settled into memory. People in Riverton, though still startled by the triple tragedy, resumed their day-to-day. The old riverside bend remained, but fewer crowds came. The cautionary tale took root, especially for the younger folks who had heard about Jonah, Milo, and Corinne. During the next year's summer, a handful of out-of-towners visited the bend for picnics. Some said they saw 3 shapes standing by the reeds at sunset, shapes that vanished the moment anyone approached. Others said they felt a guiding nudge if they drifted too far out, as if a protective spirit insisted they keep near the shore. Lydia eventually left Riverton, relocating to another region for college. She seldom spoke of that day. On her last night in town, she confided in Callie that she'd had a final dream: Jonah, Milo, and Corinne, smiling softly and waving goodbye from across the water. She believed they were letting her go. Callie stayed in Riverton, finishing community college, helping at her parents' orchard. She visited the bend from time to time, each trip no longer overshadowed by fear, but by a gentle sadness. She found purpose in sharing water safety tips with local youth, ensuring no one else repeated that tragic mistake. On the one-year anniversary of the tragedy, the friend group that remained returned to the Riverside Bend for a small memorial. A slender cluster of them, just 5, gathered near the slope. The air carried the hush of approaching evening. They lit floating lanterns with little messages scrawled inside. Jonah, we hope you're swimming in sunshine. Milo, your smile and courage stay with us. Corinne, we wish we'd kept you safe. One by one, they set the lanterns on the water's surface. The flickering lights drifted slowly downstream, a luminous chain of love and regret. No one spoke, but a sense of closeness blossomed. Suddenly, a faint breeze tugged at the water, swirling the lanterns. A hush came over the group. For a moment, it felt as if the lost 3 were acknowledging the tribute. Then, the lights gently scattered downstream. Later that night, Callie stepped away from the group, watching the moon's reflection. She thought she heard a distant laugh, echoing across the bend. It might have been her imagination, or perhaps a final ephemeral farewell. In the years that followed, the story of that triple drowning, the illusions that lingered, and the hush that enveloped the Riverside Bend became part of Riverton's local lore. Some described it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating nature. Others whispered that the 3 spirits had chosen to guard the bend, preventing further tragedies. Callie never forgot the lessons. Life is precious and precarious, especially in the face of natural forces like the river's current. She also discovered that tragedy forges unbreakable bonds among survivors, even if those bonds are laced with sorrow. Occasionally, travelers passing by would notice on the ridge a tall, quiet figure, a woman standing alone, with a bouquet of wildflowers in hand, gazing over the water. They might see her kneel and place the flowers near the bank, then linger as if in silent conversation with the gentle swirl of the river. If asked, the locals would just nod and say, "That's Callie. She's paying her respects to old friends." And so, the Riverside Bend remained the same, ever-flowing. It carried the hush of a summer day that had changed many lives, and it silently bore witness to the love, the laughter, and the heartbreak etched forever in its waters.